Hello. This is what, part 5? Yeah, part 5 of WotY, okay? Book 5. 5. Nice. Um, the only real difference between this time around and usual is instead of water this time, I have high C orange. I don't know if you can hear me shaking that. Hold on. I don't know if you could hear that sloshing at all. Anyway, assuming you're hearing me talking right now, that means this recording is the one that's going up. I'm just saying that because I don't know, because I'm a little tired, so this one might not be going up. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know why I'm even bringing that up. I gotta get better at this. But I digress. Okay, let's pick up where we left off on October 16th. In the past 36 hours since leaving Los Angeles. Did I just say Los Angeles? God bless it. In the past 36 hours since leaving Los Angeles, the convoy had been left relatively alone, it seemed. Whether or not it was due to them outpacing Magali and Arkia's agents, or them just not knowing where they were, Nonami did not know. She did, however, worry that every mile they drove drew them closer and closer into a trap. She couldn't say why, though, other than just sheer intuition. It just didn't feel right that they'd been so unharried this whole time. They'd entered the Cleveland city limits about 20 minutes ago now, making great time despite a few necessary but brief stops, and were currently driving against the coast of Lake Erie when she spotted it on the horizon. A great, long-necked creature rushing towards them at high speed through the water. With a head shape somewhere between plesiosaurus and horse, greenish-brown scaly skin, glowing yellow eyes, and a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth, it seemed the legend of Bessie had come to life and was out for their blood. "Evasive maneuvers!" she ordered into the comms as the beast threw itself ashore and onto the highway in front of them. It was just before dawn, and fortunately not many people were out on that stretch of highway just yet. So long as they could take care of this creature, be it real or tulpa, quickly, they'd be fine. As it was still dark enough, with the sun not rising for at least 90 minutes, Nonami decided it was safe to shift into her vampire form. However, upon doing so, she received quite the shock. It seemed that, instead of her true form emerging, she became a brown and orange-garbed magical girl. While it made sense to her, considering how the others had already been similarly affected, she cursed herself briefly for forgetting that bit of information. Still, if Ray's earlier show of strength were any indication, she should have all of her vampire powers available to use. The beast roared, slamming its massive tail into the road, just in front of the van Hyoka was driving. The Yukiona only just barely managed to drift out of the way as it hit the ground. "Everyone, stay out of its range, and we should be okay," shouted Nonami, calling on the Quake Breaker. "Hyoka, see if you can use your hydrokinesis to summon a tidal wave and drag it back into the lake. If this thing isn't a tulpa, we don't want to hurt it. But even if it is, we want as much distance between us and it as possible." It lifted its tail up again, this time whipping it at Nonami, who realized in that moment they weren't dealing with a tulpa at all. When they'd fought Magali and Arkia's tulpas back in Fumizaki, while they may have left marks on their opponents, their lack of true reality prevented them from harming the environment around them. This lake monster was leaving divots in the pavement whenever it slammed its snake-like tail at the vans. It seemed to be after something, Nonami thought, as she raised a wall of stone to block another string of blows. The vans? Possibly. But why? It wasn't a tulpa, and they had no evidence Magali and Arkia used mind control tactics like Megiddo's nanobots. Did it just not like them? The only odd thing about this group, aside from some personalities, were The presence of a lich? Their own status as magical girls? No, neither of those seemed likely. Nonami's train of thought was cut off as a wave of water erupted out of Lake Erie, dragging the monster back in and sweeping it out with a powerful riptide. When Nonami looked over at Hyoka, the girl was almost completely transparent, drained of nearly all her energy. "Did it work?" she whispered, condensing into an orb state to conserve her energy. "I do hope so. I hope so," sighed Nonami, trying her best to use her stone powers to smooth out the asphalt on the road before they headed back onto the road. Look, I never said I was a perfect writer, okay? Some things, just like the road, a little bit of my writing style does need smoothing out, I admit. What I want to know is why that creature attacked us, sighed the vampire. "Bessie," came the voice of Alex over the comms. "That was Bessie, the monster of Lake Erie. She's never been aggressive, though, at least not to that degree. You think the cargo had something to do with it?" Then it clicked. The cultists had referred to Abigail as the goddess of fear several times, though the child insisted she was no such thing. Could it be? Did she have some sort of fear aura? Something that maybe wouldn't affect higher life forms like her and the others, but would drive a beast like Bessie into a blind terror rage? Nonami hoped they wouldn't have to find out any time between now and when they arrived at their destination in Salem. "Are you feeling all right, Hyoka?" asked Emiko as they once again hit the road. The Yuki-onna was still in her orb form, despite the battle having ended about an hour prior now. Emiko wasn't even entirely sure if Hyoka was conscious at the moment, as at first she didn't respond. It was when Emiko poked her finger into the faintly glowing blue sphere that she reacted with surprise. "Emiko, don't do that!" she yelped, the surface of the sphere rippling in alarm. "It feels so weird." "Oh, sorry," apologized Emiko. "Just how are you feeling? It looked like you used up a lot of energy. Since you're still like this, you want to take some of mine? I don't mind." The orb shook back and forth rapidly, mimicking a human shaking their head. No, I'm okay," she mumbled. I've mostly recovered, I think. I'm just kind of thinking about Junji. I feel so bad that we had to separate again, and right after we got married, too." She recalled back to the day before she and the rest of them left Japan. Her and Junji had been cuddling in bed when she brought up how she wanted to stay here with him. Junji gave her a look, then patted her head gently. "My love, as much as I'm ready for our honeymoon, this situation is bigger than that," he sighed, holding her hand in his. "Your friends are gonna need you, and so is that little girl. Plus, they'll be sticking a metaphorical blade into the side of the bastards who messed with our wedding. That alone makes it worth it to me. Besides, we can have a real honeymoon when you come home. Okay?" "I'm sure he misses you just as much as you miss him," said said Iris over her shoulder from the driver's seat. "Don't get caught up thinking about what ifs. Gotta focus on the now, you know?" The orb tilted forward as if nodding, and Hyoka regained her human form, albeit still a bit translucent. She sighed and laid her head down in Emiko's lap. "Thank you, Miss Iris," yawned Hyoka. "It was very kind of you to agree to come along, by the way." The gargoyle nodded, smiling. Sure, she thought. It's not like I really had a choice anyway. Still, a part of her was enjoying herself being around all of them in a way she couldn't explain. Certainly Iris was the most social of her siblings, late or otherwise, and enjoyed the more hedonistic and enjoyable parts of human society whenever the chance arose. None of that, though, had given her the feeling just being around both Nonami's team and Cryptid Ranger had given her. It was a real, genuine sense of camaraderie, the likes of which she'd never felt before. Of course, being only a few months old and made from the absorbed essences of dozens of other beings in addition to her father's, she didn't have much to compare it to. Still, she enjoyed it more than just about any night she'd spent. Still, she enjoyed it more than just about any night she'd spent with humans, be it at a bar, club, or bedroom. She shook her head quickly. Focus, she thought. You can't let these feelings fester. You have a job to accomplish, Iris. Finish it so you can head back. But even as she said that to herself, a small part of her wondered, did she really want to go back? Over the next 10 hours of driving, there were no further incidents, though Nonami was well aware that Bessie was dogging them along Interstate 90 all the way to Buffalo. Once they turned off and began heading east, though, the rest of the drive was smooth sailing, and they pulled into Salem around nightfall. Ray was the first one out, rushing into a nearby field and collapsing into the grass before rolling around in it like a puppy. There had been a rainstorm but an hour prior, and thus the ground was still soaking wet. Oh, bleh, that there had been a rainstorm but an hour prior, and thus the ground was still soaking wet, mattered not to Ray. She had a severe dislike of confined spaces, especially ones where she couldn't hardly move and had to sit relatively still for long periods of time. This whole trip had been nothing short of torture for the Red Oni, but now she was rolling around and grinning. In quick succession, each van crew unloaded their special package and opened them. The first three, the two transported by Cryptid Ranger and the one by Iris, were empty, as Nonami suspected. Hers was the one where Abigail was being hidden, and the small vampire crawled out rather hesitantly. She had been asleep most of the trip, a trick most vampires were capable of, as it aided them well on long voyages. I'm back, she whispered in a tone that at first sounded excited, but carried a faint air of smugness. Thank you all so much for helping me, she giggled, grinning widely. I've missed this place so much. My home. Her smile turned dark, and her red eyes shifted to an odd green-black hue. And now that I no longer have a use for you, I think I'll just drink you up now. Her body shimmered and changed. Where 1 second had stood a blonde girl, no older than 12 or 13, now stood a woman easily 3 times that age. She wore flowing red and dark blue robes, which bore the palm-shaped crest of Megalianarchia on the back. Her eyes, once red like any vampire's, were now an iridescent green color, with streaks of black throughout the irises and sclera. Her hair grew in length to match the new form, curling upwards at the ends like lightning bolts. Extending her hands, she fired 2 separate beams of crimson energy. The first struck Grigory, who began writhing on the ground, screaming for only a moment before going all too still. The other struck Midori, who, rather than scream in pain, let loose a rage-filled bellow as the frighteningly familiar lime-green glow of hate, this time tinged crimson, burned in her eyes once more as she began stomping towards Emiko. I'm off to retrieve my relics, dearies, giggled Abigail, who looked even more youthful now after whatever it was she'd done, and she grabbed a nearby broom and lifted off on it. Thank you for getting me this far. The wards around this town prevented me from entering for so long. But inside that somewhat degrading cell, I was kept quite safe from them. Toodles! Emiko immediately put up her guard as Midori swung a powerhouse blow at her. It was clear she was under the influence of whatever Abigail, or whoever she was, had done to her, but it didn't make her any less of a threat in the moment. Even still, Emiko did what she could to only block the blows as they came, rather than try fighting back. From the corner of her eye, she could see Nonami, Sarah, and Jonas gathered around Guri, the latter of whom seemed both inconsolable and utterly furious. Had the werewolf been killed? Emiko hoped not. He seemed like a decent enough guy. plus he owed her 5,000 yen. Midori! Yelled Emiko as Iris, Hyoka, and Cryptid Gold came to her aid. Calm down and think, girl! Abigail did something to your mind! This isn't you! We've been through this! Gold nodded, a stiff but concise movement in his suit. Hyoka, for her part, was getting a terrible sense of deja vu from the whole thing. Just like before, there had been no Ray. Where was she now? The answer was simple, though Hyoka didn't know it. When Abigail had flown off, Ray had activated her invisibility and shot off after her. She was doing her best to keep her rage in check, something she'd been learning from Emiko with mixed results. But even with all that anger management training, she could still feel flickers of flame sparking from her fingertips as she sailed through the air. It seemed Abigail was looking for something that she couldn't quite find immediately, until she quickly zapped down to street level in front of an old house. It had belonged to one of the original townfolk of Salem during the infamous witch trials, kept around till the modern day, where it now served as a museum. You tried to keep this from me, but you failed, you old fool, cackled Abigail to herself, putting her hand to the ground, a green glow not dissimilar from her eyes emanating from her palm. As Ray watched, an ancient stone emerged from the ground, which the witch immediately picked up and placed in a bag on her hip. Seizing the opportunity before she could get on her broom again, Ray lunged at her. As she was still invisible, Abigail was thrown completely off guard and was sent careening into a nearby tree. What on earth? She grunted, seemingly otherwise unfazed by the powerful blow. Oh, one of the Oni, perhaps? Not the blue one, I'd guess. She's probably still too busy with the lich. Which means you're the idiot red one. Come out where I can see you, Red. Make this easy on yourself. Not likely, shouted Ray defiantly, summoning a pillar of fire behind Abigail, which she then shot at her. Call her an idiot, would she? Well, then Ray would make sure she used every trick she had to make sure this chick would regret it. Back with Emiko, things were taking a turn for the worse. Midori's strength was peaking again due to her current bloodlust, and the only other one who could have hoped to calm her down was dead. Guri had been instrumental in teaching Midori essential breathing techniques and mind-calming tricks to help soothe her whenever these flare-ups occurred. They were going to have to restrain her like before and use Sarah's totem. The problem was, she'd seen that coming now and knocked the totem from Sarah's hands and sent it flying into a sewer grate. While the Banshee went off to retrieve it, Emiko and Iris were using their immense physical strength to try and hold the lich in place. Sounds like this isn't the first time this has happened, grunted Iris, her arms locked around Midori's legs to keep her from moving forward. Unfortunately, yes, groaned Emiko as she held the lich in a powerful headlock, keeping Midori's arms around her back by sitting on them. 6 months ago, Oi, hold still! She was a revenant after me because, reasons. We had to calm her then too, only it was easier because of Sarah's talisman. Midori roared in anger as Cryptid Gold came around and wrapped his arms around her middle, locking her arms in place and allowing Emmy to get a better grip on the lich's head. In the brief moment her arms were free, though, Midori lashed out and shattered part of Gold's helmet, revealing the face underneath. A single large eye peered out through the wrecked visor. A Cyclops! You all right? Shouted Emmy, knowing how sensitive Cyclops' eyes could be. Fine, grunted Gold. He'd managed to close his eye in the nick of time, but there were still some small shards sticking out of his face, and a little bit of blood trickled down his off-beige skin. Release me! Roared Midori, who sent a surge of scalding heat through her undead body, which almost made her captors unhand her from the sheer shock of it. Not just yet! Shouted Emiko through gritted teeth, ignoring the burning sensation in her arms. Damn it, where's that Kobayashi when you need her? The answer to Emiko's question was only a quarter mile away, where Ray and Abigail were exchanging blows and blasts at one another. Ray's controlled fireballs that extinguished the moment they hit something that wasn't her target. Abigail's concentrated magic blasts, not unlike the kind Ray had been hit with by Usako during their more intensive sparring bouts. As such, she could somewhat shrug them off, being a bit used to them, though Abigail's were much more potent than the ones Usako was capable of. Briefly, as Ray readied a new technique she dubbed the burning chainsaw, she wondered just what the hell Abigail was. She wasn't Overus or Dweller, that much anyone could tell from a glance, yet she used magic just like they did. When Gardner had first found her, they'd assumed she was a vampire due to the glowing red eyes, even though they'd changed a bit now, from what Ray could see. Was she something new? Or maybe, she thought absent-mindedly, something really, really old. Only one way to find out. "Hey, hold on 1 sec!" shouted Ray from behind a tree. In response, Abigail's head jerked rapidly in the direction her voice had come from, and a smirk danced across her face. "Going to surrender?" she purred, placing a black-gloved hand on her hip. "Sorry, Oni. I don't take prisoners." "I wasn't planning on it," jabbed Ray, trying to keep her temper under control long enough to hopefully pry some intel out of her enemy. "I just, want to know what you are. Where I come from, when we fight, we, let our opponent know who and what we are and where we're from, right? If you're going to kill someone, you want them to, know who did it. So, okay, my name is... I can't say Ray's Oni name. Ray Kobayashi. I'm a red Oni from Fumizaki. Who are you?" Abigail flashed her hand through her long blonde hair, every strand glistening in the full moon's light, as she side-eyed Ray with a sinister smile. "I know you're stalling for time, but I'll admit you've played to my personal vanity stupendously, so I'll play along, child." She turned her whole body to face Ray, using some sort of telekinesis to lift the tree the Oni was hiding behind out of the ground and sent it sailing through the air towards parts unknown. "My real name is Abigail Williams, and I lived here in Salem 400 years ago. Tell me, are you familiar with the infamous witch trials?" Ray shook her head. Super vaguely, but they aren't really taught about it in Japanese schools." Fair enough," she replied, cocking her head. "I'll summarize then, though do try and keep up. Over the course of a few months in the 1600s, a group of girls managed to convince this entire town that there were witches among them, that they would go out at night into the forest and commune with the devil who would give them terrible powers. The puritanical Christians that populated Salem back then were absolutely terrified by the prospect, paranoid to the point of insanity, where neighbor would accuse a neighbor of cavorting with Satan. The accused would of course be tried and found guilty of witchcraft based on nothing more than hearsay and rumors, and the occasional, shall we say, inspired performance. Her smile, once smug and sinister, turned wide and toothy. They never once thought that the one who first brought the accusations to light could have possibly been the one committing all those acts. You asked what I am, Ms. Kobayashi? I am something beyond your simple classification of monsters, though I used to be a vampire, like your orange-haired friend. When I was very young, before my final transformation into a Night Stalker, I found this artifact. A small statue of an unknown deity. It gave me the ability to feed without ever needing to touch another being, without ever sinking my fangs into their flesh. I could feed on their very thoughts now, and what's more, as I quickly discovered, the more I did so, the stronger I became. Soon I could even influence the minds around me to my own ends, stir up their emotions, and drink in the paranoia and fear without ever having to directly drain someone. In time, I even learned how to cast true magic with the help of some similar artifacts. She extended her hand, and from out of the ground next to Ray, where the tree had once stood, shot an oddly preserved wooden doll, in the shape of some animal Ray had never seen before. It had 5 legs and 4 tails, with 3 triangle-shaped eyes set within its oblong head. It almost looked like an alien mockery of a wolf or a big cat. The artifact raced into Abigail's open hand, and when she grasped it, an aura not unlike ebon flame engulfed her, the outer edge of which was tinged a sickly yellow-green. Ray realized she'd seen a similar aura before, when Usako transformed into that other dark form like she had on Kaiju Island. And one time before that, though Ray had not been present to witness it, she'd heard it described by Emiko and Sarah. The aura made the whole area around Abigail feel heavy, as though gravity had been turned up to 11, and even the mighty Rei Kobayashi found herself stumbling to the ground as her mind screamed at her to run. In desperation, she began grasping around for something to pull herself away, or for a handhold to claw her way to freedom, and then the feeling was gone. She had a faint recollection of hearing a truly terrible hissing sound, and then nothing. Abigail had vanished, apparently finding what she'd been after. Abigail had vanished. Apparently what she'd... Hold on. Abigail had vanished. Apparently finding what she'd been after enough? I really need to fix that wording. It seemed odd, though. She had the perfect opportunity to kill me, thought Ray blearily. So why didn't she? She looked over at her right hand, outstretched and set into the hole where the tree had stood moments before. In her palm she now held a white stone, it etched into which was a strange symbol she didn't recognize. It resembled a tree branch with 6 points, extending from the bottom left corner of the stone to the top right. It looked for all the world to her like some kind of rune or symbol, but before she could think more on it, she lost consciousness. "I found her!" shouted Iris, as 2 others dashed over to meet her. It had been 2 hours since Abigail's escape, and in that time they'd finally managed to subdue Midori, though it hadn't been easy, and even once they had, the Lich was still distraught over the death of her friend Grigori. Jonas, too, hadn't taken the death of his best friend very well, and had wrecked one of the vans they'd arrived in quite thoroughly with a vampirically empowered kick. Fortunately, Nonami had been able to somewhat calm the younger vampire down, as she'd been in his position several times before. "That's the thing about both immortality and the job we do," she sighed, offering him a comforting hug. "We're gonna see many of our friends pass on, either by natural means or in battle or otherwise. The best you can ever do is to honor their memories, as I do." Now, though, Nonami was understandably worried about Ray. As she'd rushed over to Iris's call, images of past teammates' deaths flashed unbidden into her mind, even though she tried her hardest to push them back. She knew Ray was tough, possibly the strongest Oni to ever live. But this enemy they now faced was something she knew strength alone couldn't save you from. "Is she?" she started to ask, but when Nonami saw Ray's eyes fluttering weakly around, taking in her surroundings, she couldn't help but feel tears of relief well up in the corners of her own eyes. "Ray, thank the gods you're okay." The red Oni turned her head slowly to look at her partner, eyes as wide as she could manage at the moment. "Wow, you must have been really worried," she said weakly with an even weaker laugh. "I don't think I've ever heard you call me by my first name before." Nonami sighed and wrapped her arms around the big lug, just grateful for her friend's safety. Emiko, meanwhile, had also come to check on Ray, but seeing she was fine, instead turned to face Iris with a question. "Drake-san, can we talk for a second?" she whispered firmly. "In private?" The 2 girls walked over to a nearby house, another one of the original structures of the town, which had been left miraculously untouched by the earlier fight. "What are you, really?" asked Emiko flatly. "During that whole ordeal, you never once transformed. You said you were a gargoyle, yet you don't have any of the physical signs. So who are you, Iris Drake? Who are you, really?" The dark-skinned woman laughed, an innocent enough sound, but one that carried an undertone that almost made Emiko's skin crawl. "It's enough to know that I'm on your side in this, princess. What does it matter who or what I am, so long as our goals align, Now, let's go back to our proper rules, Before you ask a question you really don't want the answer to." She turned and walked back over to Nonami, asking her a question Emiko was too distracted to hear. She now had even more questions burning in her mind, but she at the very least knew that Iris was someone not to be trusted fully. Maybe for now, as she said, their goals aligned, but what about once this was all over? What then? Would she turn on them? Who did she work for? Emiko was going to get to the bottom of it. October 17th. The walls of the room were tall, sterile white things that stretched at least 20 feet high, reflected on which was light from what had to be a window that couldn't be seen. In either direction, a wooden floor seemed to stretch on endlessly, though a corner was visible ahead. Doors lined the path, many doors, but with no way of opening them, and the hall itself was quite narrow. It was here Usuko found herself, not sure how she'd gotten here, or what she was doing. She had tried breaking through one of the doors, but without both her arms to swing the bat, she just didn't have the strength. Now she found herself running, fleeing a sound that had started coming towards her. It had an odd, otherworldly resonance that couldn't be described easily, but wet and echoing. No matter how far Usuko would run, she could hear the same sound always an equal distance away, so she kept running. Soon after rounding a corner, she found herself confronted with an entirely new area to this weird place she was in. It was a sort of pool, indoors with several dark alcoves one could dive into and perhaps explore. The bottom went down what looked to be at least 100 feet, with no ladder to grab onto, and a pool lip at least 10 inches above the waterline. The alcoves at least looked shallow enough to get something of a grip on to keep one's head above the water, and perhaps they led to a safer area? The resonance sounded again, but closer now, and on instinct, Usuko turned to see if she could spot whatever was making the sound. Instead, she discovered that the hall she'd been in seconds ago had transformed. Now it was a wide open room, still with the same high white walls and wooden floors, but now with a dark red shag carpet in the center, where a similarly colored chair sat empty. Hesitantly, she approached the chair when the whole structure began to shake violently, and the resonance became a roaring gale of wind and earthquake. With a scream, Usuko jolted up out of bed. It was the third time she'd had that same nightmare, ever since she'd left Kaiju Island. It was always the same, in that same bizarre space that seemed almost alive. Alive and angry. She had first seen it in the temple, and had explored it to much greater detail then. The pool's alcoves, she had discovered, led to a Victorian-era dining room, one that seemed ready for guests at any moment, although everything in the room, including the room itself, was in half scale, as though made for children. Beyond it, through a curtain, lay an island, deserted but once inhabited by some manner of mining operation, perhaps? Distant, almost alien structures could be seen, but Usuko hadn't been able to get a good look at them before Sarah had ripped her out from the vision. Apparently the Banshee hadn't seen any of it, and as Usuko herself wasn't sure what she had seen, She just told Sarah she hadn't seen anything either. She'd always hated big, open, indoor areas like that ever since she'd been a kid. Something about them just gave her the willies in a way she couldn't describe. Atriums were fine. Things like museums were okay, but large, empty areas like the kind in her dream filled her with an unknown dread. That's the third night in a row, she sighed, rolling over and checking her phone to see what time it was. 3:12 a.m. Lovely. Oh, a text from Nonami. Wisako, report to Gardner as soon as humanly possible. I know you will likely not see this until morning, but make haste. Contact Lydia. Wisako felt her stomach drop. The text had come just after she had gone to bed, about 5 hours ago. In a flash, she was out of bed and throwing on a quick outfit. A pinkish-purple warm shirt, and a dark red-brown buckled skirt, as well as some black leggings. Remembering the new prosthetic Emmy had gifted her before she'd left, Wisako attached it to her shoulder and gave it a few quick test movements. It looked almost like a real arm, covered in a synthetic flesh, which was laid over an intricate and complex device containing the most laid over an intricate and complex device combining the most modern advances in cybernetics with good old-fashioned clockwork machinery. It tapped directly into her nervous system, and the movement responses were just so delayed from what her brain was telling it to do. But with practice, she felt she could adjust. Hopefully, she wouldn't need to so soon, she thought grimly, as she headed out the door and dialed Lydia's number to let the cat girl know she was coming. Came the groggy reply of Lydia on the other end. Usko, it's real late, you know. Oh, right. Yeah, I'm on my way, like I said, she stated into the phone as she jumped off the roof and took flight on her feathery wings. Flying in, so I shouldn't be too long. Meet you on the roof? Affirmative, gurgled Lydia, and Usako could hear the audible ka-chunk of a recliner being pushed into upright position. It reminded her of the sound her father's chair would make, a sound that, even though she now hated the man, she found comforting. The flight from Sakura Tower to Ayanami Industries was indeed a short one, and Usako was quite glad she didn't see anyone out that night. The full moon high in the sky would have made her quite visible, and she didn't have the advantage of Emiko or Rei's invisibility powers to mask her flight. That is a plot hole. She does have those powers. I'm sorry. Touching down, she was greeted by Marie Alabaster, Modred's albino Lamia assistant, who led Usako to Lydia's office where the cat girl sat at her desk. Over the speakerphone, she could hear familiar voices in the background. Nonami and Emiko, and possibly Sarah? Hey guys, said Usako. Got your message, Nonami. What's going on that you can't tell me over the regular phone? Pausing only to greet Usako, Nonami immediately and without reservation explained to her the ordeal they'd experienced over the past 2 days, complete with a culmination of Abigail's betrayal, but also adding in some recently developed news. The Department of Homeland Security has caught images of her leaving on a jet for Paris, though why she's going there is anyone's guess. We're getting ready to follow, but I think it might be best if you join us. Yours and Midori's magical skills may be our best bet at stopping her. Perhaps our only. Do you think you've recovered? Usako glanced down at her false arm, which looked so much like her old one, and clenched her fists. On some degree, she was ready. Truthfully, she felt like she'd been ready before Nonami and the others had left, and now couldn't help but feel somewhat guilty for what had transpired in her absence. No more. Yeah, I'll meet you all in Paris, at the Eiffel Tower, in 1 week. See you then. Usako stared at Lydia. Please help me make the arrangements, Mrs. Nakamoto. I'm already on it, she sighed with a smile. October 24th. I'm taking a sip. A gentle breeze blew over the river Seine. Actually, I hope, is it River Seine? Seine? Seine. The River Seine. I'm calling it Seine. I'm sorry. A gentle breeze blew over the River Seine, stirring a few fallen leaves in the water just a tad. Yoko watched them as they slowly drifted together, as they slowly drifted closer and closer together, like two lovers rushing towards each other's arms. Before they could be united at last, a boat came chugging by, dragging the two leaves away to parts unknown. The Yukiona sighed in boredom. They'd been in Paris for 3 days now, and the charm was starting to wear off for her. Sure, the city was gorgeous at any time of the year, though especially now with the leaves changing colors, but Hyoka had never really been all that into architecture and design. She supposed she could at least appreciate it, but at the end of the day, they were just buildings to her. Fancy boxes. She had, however, used this as her excuse to get into the Louvre. She had always wanted to see the art there, especially the Mona Lisa. However, when she got close to its display, she found it absolutely crowded by tourists. Pouting, she quickly hatched a devilish idea. Retreating to a nearby area absent of any people, she shifted invisible and phased through the wall and into the painting. She began moving it, rattling it in the frame, and doing her best to refrain from snickering as tourists panicked. Before long, she herself was panicking as well, when the extremely sensitive security alarms began blaring. Hyoka had forgotten about those and quickly ceased her antics, making a beeline for the exit, still invisible. After leaving, she'd made her way over to the Eiffel Tower, intent on going to the top and seeing the view. She'd also planned to take many pictures to share with Junji later. Of course, when she spoke to the tour guide in charge of collecting admission to the top, she'd forgotten she was still invisible and so gave the man the fright of his life. After this, she realized that she could just float to the top and rematerialize there, which she promptly did. She was fortunate enough that the other people up there were quite distracted by the view to notice a pale Japanese girl suddenly manifest into their midst. Hyoka managed to take quite a few pictures, as well as simply take in the stunning Parisian, you know what I'm trying to say, view for a while, before once again vanishing from view and returning to ground level. Technically, she was supposed to be looking for signs of Abigail, or Megali Anarchia in general, but so far she and the others had all come up with zilch. It didn't help that despite Iris claiming to have been from here, she seemed to be about as lost as everyone else, save Nonami. She'd been here a few times, though admitted it had been decades since her last visit, and she was much more familiar with 19th century Paris than she was its 21st century counterpart. Hyoka glanced back up at the boat, which was pulling into a dock now, and noticed someone quite familiar disembarking alongside 3 others she didn't quite know. The first person she saw, and the one she rushed to hug, was Usako. The pinkette was understandably surprised to see her snowy friend, but reciprocated the hug, smiling. The other figures with her, the ones Hyoka didn't recognize, were introduced to her by Usako. Misato Takibana, or Megami Toriyama, as she was still going by for the time being, had offered to come along as backup on the off chance Usako needed assistance. Plus, as she'd brought up when broaching the topic to Usako, she'd never gotten to visit France before the Usako of her timeline had decimated it. The other 2 people were Elizabeth Kosaka and her associate, Russell, who was currently possessing the body of a Japanese businessman in order to operate in human society covertly. They had come along purely by coincidence, as one of the keys that sealed Aramana's away was apparently located in the infamous catacombs beneath the city. Elizabeth had even suggested to search there for signs of the cult. It would be the perfect place to hide, as even now the entirety of the underground maze of tunnels was yet to be fully mapped. Let's go find Nonami then, chirped Hyoka. She's been coordinating her search from the Garden of France, over by the embassy. Come on. The French headquarters for Gardena was located in an older building that had once been used as a palace for King Louis the 16th. Nonami was in a conference room that had been temporarily converted into a makeshift office for her, with several computer monitors to view surveillance footage from all over the city. In truth, that task had actually been given to the beholder assisting her, his many eyes able to view every camera angle individually and make sense of everything he was seeing. Nonami herself merely had her hands full, analyzing the intel Gardner had managed to collect on Megalianarchia, which, while sizable, didn't give her many clues as to what their goal even was. Chaos had been what she'd been told by the cultists back in Japan, but she had her doubts it was that simple. No, there was more to it, and she knew it. The question was, what? So engrossed in her research was she that Nonami hardly even noticed when Usuko and company entered the room. When Elizabeth cleared her throat, however, Nonami's head perked right up. "Elisa!" she exclaimed. "What are you... Oh, Usuko! It's good. It's so good to see you. It's so good to see you, dear. Have you been well, I hope?" "Somewhat," sighed Usuko. "It's good to see you again, Nonami. Missed ya. Oh, happy belated birthday, by the way. Here, I got you something." Rummaging through her purse, Usuko handed her great-aunt a small wrapped box. With a smile, Nonami gladly accepted it and tore through the paper to reveal a jewelry box, clearly from somewhere in the City of Light. Opening it, Nonami beheld a pair of black jade earrings in the shape of bats. Giggling softly, she put them in before showing them off to Usuko, giggling, she put them in and showed them off to Usuko before returning to business mode. "I'll be brief. We've explored most of the city's surface area already, with little to no sign of Megalianarchia's presence detected, let alone Abigail's. I'm hoping you'll have better luck tracking her down. If anyone will be able to sense her magical presence, it will be you, Usuko. Now then, Elizabeth, tell me why you're here?" "There's an item down in the catacombs that is essential to defeating Aramanas," Elizabeth explained as she'd had to Hyoka, "a key containing a portion of the collective power of those who sealed him away millennia ago. I didn't come along to assist you or Gardner. It's simply that our goals align for the time being." Elizabeth's words may have said one thing, but Nonami had known the Dhampir for a long time, and could tell when she was blustering. There was no way Elizabeth's pride would ever let her admit that she wanted to help Nonami or her friends, not after everything she'd done. "I'd advise you to come along as well," Elizabeth added. "The catacombs are enormous. I would be shocked if this group you were after weren't using them." "That's not a bad idea, Elizabeth, thank you," commented Nonami. "Usuko, will you be so kind as to accompany me? I know you just arrived and all, but we'll need your keen magical senses to pick up anything that might be a sign of Abigail." Usuko nodded. Of course she'd help, that's why she was here. She owed those cult bastards some pain, and she intended to repay them in kind for what they'd done to her. Although, the more Usuko thought about it, the more she wondered if the thing she'd fought that day at Hyoka's wedding was actually a tulpa. Sure, at the time it seemed like one, but thinking more, she'd remembered hearing how non-fatal injuries inflicted by a tulpa tended to dissipate after a time. One look at her synthetic right arm was proof enough that whatever she'd fought was no tulpa. As they left Nonami's office, Usuko rejoined with Misato in the lobby and took her aside for a moment. Hey, sorry, Megami. I was wondering something. Is it possible that the other me could have also come back in time? Misato froze in place for a half-second before shaking her head. Not as far as I know, she replied, but there were... A lot of pages missing from the old book Mom found that taught me how to come back. Knowing you, her, it's not impossible that maybe... Her words were cut off as a centaur came rushing towards them, managing to break just in time to not collide with either Tachibana, anachronistic or otherwise. She seemed to be out of breath and scared to death of something she'd just seen. Giant snake! She screamed before galloping further into the building. Oh, this should be good, sighed Usako, summoning her bat, while Masato pulled out her twin pistols. Together, they met Nonami outside, who it seemed was already acutely aware of the situation now unfolding in front of them. An anaconda the size of a passenger train was slithering up the side of the Eiffel Tower, twisting the structure as it did. People at the top, unable to flee, were trapped as the massive ophidiophobic's nightmare flicked its oily black tongue at them. Oh, fuck, no. No, let me try that again. Oh, fuck, no, was all Nonami said, and all Usako needed to know about how exceptionally dangerous this situation was. If Nonami was swearing, things were never good. Let me tell you, if Nonami was swearing, things were not good. Not only did they need to defeat this likely tulpa and prevent it from crushing the Eiffel Tower, but also figure out a way to explain away the snake without breaking the masquerade. From Nonami's reaction, Usako had a sneaking suspicion that the former would prove to be far easier than the latter. Well, what's the plan then? Asked Usako as she pulled up the skin at the base of her new arm. There was a small lever there she'd been instructed to flick when she was about to enter battle. Apparently, it allowed for quicker reaction times and increased movement speed for the limb, though at the risk of damaging it easier, as it could throw off the somewhat delicate inner workings. We need to find the one controlling it, stated Nonami. It's far too big for us to fight on uneven ground. I'll be getting in contact with President Macron and I probably did not say that right. With President Macron and let him know Gardner has this under control, and that this is only a large hologram being projected as an art exhibit, or something like that. Even as she said that, however, the snake began pulsating and shaking violently, almost threatening to topple the tower over. What Usako and the others didn't know was that Rei was currently inside the massive serpent, blasting it full of flaming holes. Flaming hole. She'd been close by when it had appeared, and had charged down its massive gullet with a roar before beginning her rampage. Finally, the snake's form couldn't keep itself together any longer, and it collapsed in on itself and faded away, sending Rei plummeting to the ground, or would have, had she not caught herself mid-freefall and glided to safety on a well-placed thermal updraft she had created with her powers. The damage to the tower faded as well, and it returned to its original upright position as the tulpa vanished. Out of the corner of her eye, Masato saw a hooded figure dashing towards the group. Somehow, she instinctually knew he was part of Magali Anarchia and pulled her guns on him. Without hesitation or mercy, she fired one shot into each of his kneecaps, with sniper-like precision. He screamed and went down like a ton of bricks as a wicked-looking dagger fell from his hand, which had been concealed by his long sleeves. Masato kicked the dagger away and sent another sharp kick into the cultist's side. "Where is she?" she demanded, making sure she was out of touching range. "And don't play stupid, human. You know exactly who I'm talking about." Usako and Nonami both rushed over to Masato when they heard the gunshots, and were now both stood beside her and looking down at the crippled cultists who glared pure hatred back at them. "You will die screaming," he spat in French, before clamping his teeth down on a concealed poison capsule in his teeth. Or rather, would have, as he stared down at his mouth and wondered where it had gone. From behind him waltzed Sarah, holding the capsule in her hand casually. "Nice try, idiot," she laughed, speaking in French. Hold on. "Now be a good boy and tell her what she wants to hear. All right? All right." The cultist now clearly out of options, sighed in defeat and put his arms out in surrender. Your French is terrible, he groaned in heavily accented English. Fine, you want to rush to your deaths so badly? Who am I to intervene? Mademoiselle Abigail is waiting for you in the catacombs at the shrine of Gothica. You will find it directly below Gare du Nord. But you'd better hurry. She leaves soon for her final task on the Day of Shadows. My French accent is terrible. Oh, God. Final task? Questioned Nonami. What task? What is her goal? Tell me. I will say no more now. I would rather die 1,000 times over. Even if you say, torture me, I will say nothing. He spat on the ground and began laughing even as he was dragged away by 2 werewolf security guards. Well, we have confirmation that they're in the catacombs now, sighed Nonami. Usako, Sarah, gather the team and meet at the catacombs entrance on the double. We're putting an end to this madness today. As she turned to enter the building, Elizabeth stood near her, arms crossed with Russ stood next to her. Maria, we're coming as well. The Shrine of Gothica is where the key is said to be located. I wouldn't be surprised if she were tapping its energy for herself. Russ nodded in agreement.
We can't let her use it. It's theoretically self-sustaining, but so long as some energy is left within it. We can't let her use it. It's theoretically self-sustaining so long as some energy is left within it. But if everything is drained away, there will be nothing to replenish, and it will become a useless piece of metal. This cannot happen.
Nonami considered the Shade's words for a moment. They rang true to her, though she certainly had her hang-ups about working with Elizabeth again. Usako might have begun to trust her after New Atlantis, but Nonami had seen firsthand the crazed look in her eye when they'd fought last year during the breakout crisis. She'd seen what the Dhampir was capable of now, when she'd seen the remains of those innocent campers who she'd eaten to regenerate herself. But Nonami also knew who Elizabeth used to be. Maybe still was somewhere deep down. A gentle, shy and caring, though quick to anger young woman, with a fondness for both learning and for teaching. Perhaps a little temperamental at times, a result of unresolved anger issues she had towards her biological father, to be sure. Still, she and Nonami had at one point been almost like sisters. Usako, I think I'll have to defer to you here, she sighed heavily, looking to the surprised Pinkette. My own feelings about Elizabeth may bias my decision on the matter. Do you think we can trust her? It didn't even take Usako a second to nod in confirmation. She had plenty of chances to kill me on the way to New Atlantis, and even when we were there, especially during the Spriggan fight. Instead, she worked with me. We fought together. She even risked her own neck to knock Kuriko out of that bark-faced bitch's grasp so she couldn't absorb more of her blood. She thought for a second before adding, besides, anyone who'd willingly get up on stage and sing meme karaoke with me can't be all bad. You and me made a good team on All-Star. Elizabeth blushed so heavily it felt like her face might combust, and she could feel Russ's laughter even before he began bellowing. One swift blow to his arm later, and she had regained some of her cool. Yes, well, thank you for the vote of confidence, Takibana. For whatever it's worth, you're not too bad yourself. And we're gonna end it there. We're at just shy of an hour, and to be fair, the last part was an hour and a half. So, yeah, I think we'll end it there. Things are about to really heat up. I won't say why, though, but I think we've probably got 2 more parts in this, thereabouts. This will probably be the one with the most parts, I'd wager. Yeah, because, I mean, even if you count the Christmas special on part 2, that would only be 5. So, well, to be fair, with those, I wasn't kind of restricting myself to about an hour per video, so, yeah. But, yeah, hope you'll tune in to the next one, and, Oh yeah, just fun fact: the parts that were actually written, or the parts where they were speaking French just now, I actually wrote in French. So the reason I was kind of hesitating there a little bit because I was like, okay, I actually had to bring it up on my translator app to be like, okay, what did I write here again? I can't quite remember. Like Sarah saying, what was it? Jolie essai, idiot. I kind of figured that's nice try, idiot. Which I don't know. That might be wrong. But yeah, here's how I would have said it. Um, if I because I can't speak French. I'm like breaking the fourth wall here. I'm like I got a lot of French in me, and yet I can't hardly speak it for save my life. So here's that whole thing. Jolie essai, idiot. Maintenant soyez un bon garçon et dites-lui ce qu'il veut entendre. D'accord, d'accord. Yeah, see, I can't. I know you gotta there's stuff like rolling tongues and stuff in there, but I just. So I didn't even try. I was like, okay, yeah, we're gonna translate this shit. But I hope to see you in part 6 where we will meet a new friend, have a big battle, and Usuko and Nonami are going to have quite a moment. But I won't say exactly what. Just that you'll have to tune in to see who they're gonna see. I wonder. Okay, until then, take care, have a good one, and bayonara.